Ryan Coogler's Sinners isn't simply another horror story. It is a powerful revelation of America's real-life monsters. For instance, beneath Mississippi's scorching sun, Jim Crow's brutal realities transform chain gangs into horrific scenes of racial cruelty. In another scene, the harsh realities force black communities into desperate measures, including the painful practice of racial passing. And at the same time, Mississippi's local Chinese community quietly face their own struggles with inclusion, marginalization, and the complex relationship with their black neighbors. So join us today for part two of our breakdown of the black experience from the movie Sinners. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. But without further ado, let's get started. The horror film Sinners is not just a typical scary movie. It is a story deeply rooted in the black experience. In my first breakdown, I didn't get to fully explore all of the ways this film connects specifically to our history and our struggles. So I decided today to create another episode where I dive just a bit deeper. One of the most haunting and powerful moments in Sinners is when Delta Slim shares a traumatic past as a prisoner on a Mississippi chain gang. This brief and stark admission carries immense weight, and it's not just physical but deeply emotional, revealing unseen scars of Jim Crow's relentless cruelty. Chain gangs were never simply about punishment. They were a calculated exploitation, a twisted reincarnation of slavery itself. Black codes and systemic efforts criminalized African Americans deliberately, funneling them into prisons where their bodies were reclaimed for forced labor. Shackled together and forced into relentless physical toll, prisoners performed the humiliating convict shuffle, and with each exhausting step, a visual representation of oppression. The irons tore their flesh. It created swollen, infected shackle sores and left their limbs permanently scarred. Yet beyond the physical torment, the psychological devastation was equally crippling, with every movement dictated and every ounce of dignity stolen. Yet these chain gangs were insanely profitable. Chain gangs reduced the cost dramatically for Southern governments, funding new roads, bridges, and infrastructure built on black suffering. White politicians boasted proudly of their tough justice, using racial violence to boost their popularity and elevate themselves politically. Chain gangs reinforced a system of intimidation and racial hierarchy, visually reminding black communities and anyone who challenged the white power structure that oppression was institutionalized, persistent, and merciless. Yet, by the 1950s, public outrage and mounting activism finally forced chain gangs into decline, though their threat never truly faded. Even today, proposals periodically resurface in states like Alabama and Arizona to revive this grotesque system under the guise of being tough on crime. Yet beyond overt violence and oppression like chain gangs, systemic racism often operates subtly, compelling black individuals into a painful personal sacrifice. Sinners highlights this in the movie through the tragic legacy of racial passing. In an era where black life constantly faced the struggles of segregation, economic violence, and literal lynchings, racial passing sometimes seemed as the only viable escape. This is seen vividly through Mary, Stack's complicated love interest, who confides to him that her grandfather was half black, and because of that, she passes through life as white. Her story exposes passing as a survival strategy for those with the correct features. For Mary and her grandfather, entry into whiteness meant safety, but it also came at an unbearable cost: permanent exile from your family, community, heritage, and your identity. Mary embodies this wound with her attachment to Stack and the juke joint, showcasing her internal weight of concealment and the aching sorrow for an identity lost. This survival tactic isn't new, though. It reaches all the way back to the very beginning of slavery. Light-skinned enslaved individuals sometimes risk everything to adopt white personas to free bondage and escape perpetual violence. Take Thomas Jefferson and his enslaved concubine Sally Hemings, who had 3 children together, and after they were emancipated, they would vanish into whiteness, exchanging their authentic heritage for the safety of anonymity. As years passed, slavery would transform into the rigid restrictions of Jim Crow. Passing would turn into a survival tool. In the bustling cities of the Great Migration North, the promises of a new identity seemed alluring. Stack even sharply notes this illustration when he states that Chicago ain't nothing but Mississippi with tall buildings. Indeed, these cities were supposed to be a refuge and a chance at a new identity. And passing in these cities seemed less like permanent exile and more like an exhausting daily masquerade for employment, education, and basic dignity. Through the complexities of passing, some individuals do rise to the top, like Walter Francis White, a fair-skinned NAACP investigator who infiltrated lynch mobs undetected due to his whiteness, expertly leveraging his racial ambiguity as a radical form of resistance. Yet the brutal cost-benefit analysis still lingered in White himself, who described the oppressive weight of navigating this dangerous tightrope, and he himself was even called a black man living in a white body. But within Sinners, Coogler skillfully portrays not only the black experience like passing and chain gangs, but he also tells a often overlooked story of the Mississippi Chinese community through Bo and Grace, shopkeepers who navigate this complex racial landscape. Initially, the Mississippi Chinese were brought here to the Americas as labor replacement for emancipated black folks. Yet when they got here, these Chinese immigrants found themselves in a racial middle ground, neither fully accepted as white nor integrated into black communities. By the 1870s, they had transitioned from plantation to small grocery stores, establishing a quiet yet significant space of economic and communal interaction, all the while picking up a Southern accent. Bo and Grace's grocery symbolizes this delicate position of the Mississippi Chinese, simultaneously a refuge and a reminder of their outsider status. Coogler emphasizes how white supremacy strategically separates marginalized groups, fostering isolation to maintain control. Yet he reveals subtle, meaningful solidarity between communities. Bo and Grace's genuine friendship with Smoke and Stack moves beyond pure business. It highlights an understanding that built through shared hardship. In depicting Bo and Grace, Coogler recovers the largely forgotten experience of Mississippi's Chinese Americans and underscores a broader truth. Oppression thrives when marginalized communities remain divided, and it weakens through connection, friendship, and a shared struggle. But beyond imprisonment, exclusion, and painful disguises, perhaps Coogler's most chiseling metaphor emerges through the charismatic villain Remick. Remick echoes historic cult-like manipulators like Jim Jones, leaders who preyed upon the genuine aspirations and vulnerabilities of the black community. Jim Jones notoriously promised safety, belonging, and emancipation from racial terror, only to exploit and ultimately destroy his own followers. The 1978 Jamestown massacre claimed over 900 lives, most of them being black parishioners desperately seeking community, liberation, and dignity. And just like Jim Jones, Remick too seduces through charisma, promising empowerment while secretly feeding off their hopes and dreams. The juke joint, once a haven for black culture, becomes twisted into a site that mirrors the horrors of Jamestown's sinister transformation. Under Remick's vampiric obsession, desires for emancipation become tools for exploitation, spiritual hunger weaponized to subjugate minds, bodies, and souls. Through Remick's calculated cruelty, Coogler implores viewers not to look away, but instead to recognize how timeless, persistent exploitation remains today. The film insists that its charismatic promises of safety and salvation, devoid of genuine care and authentic liberation, represent America's enduring legacy of racial predation. In the end, Sinners is not simply a narrative about supernatural horrors. It compels uncomfortable reckoning with America's actual racial terrors and their long-lasting effects. Through Delta Slim's chains, Mary's white passing, Bo and Grace's careful negotiation of their own identity, and Remick's chilling charisma, the film intricately weaves a tapestry of historical truths that demand understanding, reflection, and courage. Coogler brilliantly frames these intertwining oppressions not as relics of a long time ago, but urgent, living, breathing truths permeating today's struggle. By examining how those truths haunt both our history and our present, the film instructs us plainly to acknowledge these tragedies and reckon courageously with America's painful realities. Thank you. This has been One Mic Black History. I'm your host, Country Boy. This episode didn't really follow the plot like episode 1. I still thought that these bits and pieces of the Black experience deserve to be talked about, and they all kind of ended up as individual pieces that all tied together back to Sinners instead of something that just followed the plot like the original episode. Yet, I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoy making it. Additionally, if you like more episodes like this or you want to listen to episode 1, you can find that at onemichistory.com. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee Patreon page in the description below. If you like audio-only episodes, you can find my podcast wherever you get your podcast. And I'd like to thank all my financial contributors. Without you, none of this could be possible. And I love you all. Peace.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.